packet pushers.
Hello, welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, we welcome Peter Sprigata, Vice President of Product Management at iTential. iTential is our sponsor for this episode. Peter has long been a stalwart for network automation in the community. He is going to tell us about Torero, a new product he announced at the recently concluded AutoCon 1. Welcome, Peter. Tell us a little bit about Torero.
First and foremost, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Torero, we just recently announced at AutoCon 1. Torero is actually a product that we have built and are essentially giving away to the network automation community. It's actually not officially part of iTential's product portfolio, but it fills a really important need that we saw. And it really kind of came at the outgrowth of AutoCon 0, where we heard the industry kind of imploring vendors to say, hey, we really need help in the tooling space. We really need help with applications that have been designed to do very specific things that we can stitch together and help us to build out a lot of our network automation strategy. And that's a lot of where Torero has come from. And I'll be excited to kind of get into and tell you a little bit more about what it's all about.
Can you dig into that idea a little bit more about, what people were telling you that we need help? Because sometimes there's a little bit of I don't want to say a conflict between customers and vendors, but what is it they were saying? Like, what did they need help with? Can you drill into that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of the things that we heard in talking with individuals at AutoCon 0, and then it carried over even in AutoCon 1, was that there's a lot of big, broad plays out there around network automation, big platforms, big application, big tools. And for organizations that are really focused on just trying to get started in their network automation journey, they're really looking for tools that are more specifically built to achieve a very specific purpose. In some cases, because they're just getting started, they don't know what they don't know yet. And it's really hard for them to kind of work through that big ecosystem of tools and software packages and everything out there. And sometimes they just need little things to experiment and to play with and get the ideas from their head into something that's running in their lab, hopefully, which is not production, and really try to experiment and get started with network automation. And that's really kind of where that was coming from.
Yeah, so you launched Torero at AutoCon 1. Can you tell us, is there a particular significance besides just the fact that, it was kind of a natural evolution from AutoCon 0 that you heard the feedback from the community?
Torero is an idea that's been rolling around in my head for quite some time. In fact, to be quite honest, I've been rolling around in my head since almost my days at Ansible. And it's really focused not necessarily specifically on the act of network automation, but it's focused on the idea of how do we operationalize network automation. And when I look at the ecosystem and I think about what's going on in the space today, it's a space that is extremely underserved. We've got tools to do just about everything right now in network automation, in a lot of cases, 2, 3, 4, and 5 tools deep. But where we've not spent much time is thinking about, okay, I've got my proverbial low-hanging fruit, done now, right? I can push some config in. I can create a config based on a template, whatever the case might be. Now, how do I actually start to operationalize this in a way that it gets it off of my laptop and it gets it into a place where I can start to share it with, the members of my team, or even beyond that, start to share it with the support teams and the provisioning teams and the NOC and the whomever I ultimately need to be able to share things. And that's really where Torero is designed to add real value to organizations.
Yeah, I like the fact that you talked about sort of a gateway or a middle ground between the all-in-one tool versus a script on my laptop and how do I share it. So can you tell us a little bit about how you intend on doing that? So I go on and I download Torero. What happens next?
A big part of the idea behind Torero is, when I would be out talking with customers, and I think many folks can appreciate or can relate to the scenario, right, is that there's not one way to do network automation and there's not one tool set to do network automation. And it's everything from, the Ansibles and Terraforms of the world to writing code in Python or Go or however you want to go about it. There's a lot of different ways. And in a lot of respects, I shift my tools based on what I need to accomplish, right? It's that age-old adage of right tool for the right job, to be able to leverage the right tool to accomplish something. So what Torero does is it really focuses on saying, I don't care what language you want to write your automation in. Write it in Ansible, write it in Python, write it in Terraform or OpenTofu, as it were the case here. And what Torero will do is help you to bring a very unified approach to how you want to execute your automation against your production infrastructure. We've called this an automation gateway, but it's this idea that this is the point where I go from, I've developed an automation, but now I want to run it against a production infrastructure. Because, most network engineers that I speak with, right, they're very good at writing automations, right? They've gotten to a point of, they've taken, any one of Kurt's great Python for networking engineers classes or whatever the case may be. They've gotten really good at being able to do very point specific solutions. What they don't want to do is they are not interested in building an entire operational platform that supports logging and security and all of those key things we need, but yet they really have no interest in doing that. They really want to focus on building their network automation. That's the void right there where an automation gateway makes sense. And that's really how Torero is designed to insert into the customer's technology stack.
Okay, so I'm understanding that when you say automation gateway, you're not talking about a new, scripting language or something, or a new set of infrastructure or tools. You're saying bring in the tools you use, and then our automation gateway helps you operationalize these automations. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean, like what an automation gateway does for me?
Yeah, you articulated exactly right. The automation gateway, or the concept of an automation gateway, simply states that I want to be able to have a uniform way of executing my automations, so that as I want to hand off an automation to someone else, whether it's a team member, whether it's the NOC, whether it's the security team, whoever it might be, right? They don't care how I wrote it. I shouldn't have to worry about, do they know how to run Ansible? Do they know how to run a Python script? Let me give you a great, for instance, and this is kind of hits right to the crux of how Torero actually works. I can sit down and bang out a Python script that's going to go off and it's going to talk to different network devices. And let's just say, for discussion's sake, I've got a Python script that talks to a Arista box and a Cisco box, and I use an argument to pass into control as if it's an EOS box or an iOS box. The point there being is that I need that application gateway so that I can build up in Torero speak a service that handles some of that input and validates that input. So I'm not spending all day trying to figure out, okay, what's the right input to ultimately make my script work against whatever device I'm trying to run it against. An additional component to that is, as I've built this Python script, of course, I've relied on different libraries to do that. I've added some NetMiko. Maybe I've added the request library. I don't know. It could be, any third-party Python library. Well, the challenge is, and I talk a lot about this in my AutoCon 1 presentation, the challenge is, okay, it's great that it's working on my laptop, but for me to now get that working on someone else's system, they have to have all of those dependencies as well. Torero is designed to solve that problem in that it can dynamically create the execution environment based on what has been committed into a repository and execute so that I'm always running an environment that will execute the script successfully and execute it the exact same way I've developed it on my local system.
So I think that begs the question of how does Torero integrate into an existing system? And I downloaded Torero, over the weekend and played around with it. I really like the fact that, as you say, Peter, it abstracts away from some of the details that you would do anyways, but it just becomes more of a convenient factor that you abstract that away. So can you walk us through how it would integrate into the existing environment?
A big part of how Torero, or at least how I see Torero ultimately, showing up in customer environments, is there's a couple of different ways that you can leverage Torero. First and foremost is there's actually two different modes of operation that you can put Torero in. I can use it as a developer tool, right? Just locally on my machine, and I can build my connections to my repositories. I can build my services, which run automations, and that all works fine. But then I can also take it and I can put it into server mode, and through the same CLI, through the same interface with all the same commands, I get all the same feature functionality, but now it's in a centralized server. The advantage of that is, number one, is that I don't have to learn a new way of doing things. I can continue to develop the way I've always developed. I don't have to learn new tools. I don't have to learn new languages. I can continue to work exactly how I've always worked, and then let Torero be my execution side of things. So whether I integrate Torero into, say, a pipeline that kicks off from a repository, whether Torero is integrated into some other northbound system, selfishly in my case, if it was, a potential automation platform, but it doesn't have to be. The whole point here is that it's designed to allow the developer to stay focused, or the network engineer stay focused on building their automations, using the tools that they want to use. And then Torero takes advantage of the fact that they can then just go off and run no matter how we kick off that service.
So I want to make sure I understand this. I understand Torero is an execution environment, but is it also kind of serving as like a service catalog if I want other people to be able to use automations that I have developed?
Yeah, it is. If we just kind of talk through the 1, 2, 3 of Torero, when I first get started with it, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply point it at a repository, which is going to be a Git-based repository.
Okay.
Torero doesn't keep anything on disk. It works with a Git repository, and that is one of the prerequisites of working with Torero for sure, is that you have to be committed to using Git. Hopefully, that's not going to be a controversial point. I don't think it will be. From that point forward, then I build, in Torero speak, services. And a service is nothing more than says, this is how I want to run the particular asset in my repository, whether that's a Python script or an Ansible playbook. And here are all the runtime arguments that I want to include when I execute that service. And I can build n number of services against any given repository, against any given asset in the repository. So for instance, I can have a Ansible playbook that I can run. I can build a service, say one's got check mode turned on and one doesn't have check mode turned on. Those are two different services. When a teammate wants to run the service, they simply execute the service using the Torero run command. They don't have to understand that it's Ansible. They don't have to understand how do I turn on check mode. They don't have to understand how do I get inputs in, because that's all defined by the service itself.
Okay. So what I'm understanding then is, one, Torero was helping me with all of the dependencies and arguments that I might need to be aware of when running automation. And two, it takes automations off an individual laptop and makes them available to a broader team. Because you keep mentioning like it works on my laptop, which is a common thing you hear.
It does. And I'll be honest, some of Torero comes from a bit of selfishness of my own part. I mean, that's probably true for most tools, right? But
Sure.
but we've all lived this, right? I wrote this really cool thing and I want to share it with somebody. And I'm so proud of it. And I'm so excited to share it with them or her. And I give them this tool and they go off and they run it and it immediately produces an exception. And now we're going to spend the next 30 or 40 or 50 minutes trying to troubleshoot this thing, only to come to find out, that their environment doesn't have the same version of some library or dependency that I have. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of automation to begin with. And that's really where Torero shines.
So you mentioned Python and Ansible. So what are some of the technology that is supported today, or what are some of the technologies that you plan to support in the future?
Out of the box, we support Python, Ansible, and OpenTofu.
Mm-hmm.
We really wanted to add Terraform support, but thank you, BSL. We can't go down that path. But we do have full OpenTofu support. Beyond that point, we've got a few other ones that we've been thinking about. But, really my hope is, from a community perspective, I'm hoping to hear from folks in the community as to what other types of frameworks they'd love to see supported in Torero. Because the idea, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, right? This isn't an Itential branded product. We don't sell Torero. We're not asking the customer to submit all of their personal information and their life story to get Torero. It really is a truly free product. And the hope is that as the community starts to use it and coalesces around it as an automation gateway, they provide feedback about where they'd love to see it go next. Maybe it's running executables. Maybe it's, tight integration with Go. Maybe it's, if you're old school like me, let's go back to the days of Puppet and Chef and CF Engine if we want to. Who knows? But I think the technology that we've built affords us the ability to really kind of build services against anything. It's just really understanding what the community really wants to see.
So you mentioned free. Is this an open source project?
So it is not an open source project today. It is a free product that we're going to continue to develop and provide. So we're on a 3-month development cycle. So new versions every 3 months. Okay. Let me also state, though, we're not opposed to open sourcing it. There are some things that we are doing with Torero further down the road that will have ties ultimately to our product portfolio, where we'll use the Torero technology. And we really needed to get some basic functionality out the door very, very quickly. There was an inherent fear that open sourcing it would have slowed that down a little bit. And so we made the decision, at least initially, not to open source it, just to simply release it for free with a free license attached to it. Uh-huh. If we see engagement from the community, and if there's a big pickup and a want and a desire from the community, we are absolutely not opposed to open sourcing it.
Okay. So you mentioned you want the community to drive the future direction as well as provide feedbacks. But obviously that takes a little bit of time and people have to download it first to try it out. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, is there any key upcoming features, or at least within the next 3 months, that you're looking at as some of the key features that you want to implement for Torero?
So 1.0 is the one we just released. 1.1 will be the next one. And we've got some exciting things planned for 1.1. Today, for instance, Torero acts as a standalone server. So it's an all-in-one kind of implementation. We will start to put in the highly resilient components of Torero with 1.1. What that means is instead of having a single server that you're coalescing around, you'll actually be able to build out a cluster. And what a cluster is it is a set of controllers that can ultimately work with a set of runner nodes. So runner nodes are actually what do all of the work. Controllers obviously hold all of the information, and that can then become distributed. The runner layer will be horizontally scalable in the architecture. And with the idea being is that you centralize your controllers wherever you may do that, and then you push your runner nodes out very close to the assets by which you want to automate. And so that's one of the big things coming in the 1.1 release. One of the other big features, and I'm really excited about this one, I'll admit I'm a lazy engineer, and this is exactly where this feature came from, but we're going to have a really neat feature in there called Kickstart. And the Kickstart feature essentially is going to allow an organization to maintain all of Torero's config in a upstream Git repository so that they can very quickly deploy Torero servers by just simply running a Kickstart command and pointing it at that repo, and Torero will actually self-configure itself when you actually start it up. So there's no manual configuration anymore.
Well, you say lazy, that sounds like efficient to me.
One man's laziness is another man's efficiency, right? And I'll be honest, I mean, if I think back to some of the great tools out there, I mean, that's where it all comes from, right? It really does come from, whether it's efficiency gains, whether it's laziness, however you want to talk it. I think that it's really where I think a lot of the great tools come from when you're just trying to solve real problems and you're not hung up on, where this product needs to go from a commercial perspective or whatnot.
Kind of interesting you mentioned to have the runners closer to the devices and having a distributed model. To me, that is very difficult to do. So I want to double click on that a little bit. In your vision, how is that being allocated, or having a callback runner or whatnot to have that synchronized in a distributed way?
The way that we're actually going to approach it, and again, in complete transparency, there are many smarter people in the world than me. And we always take lessons learned from things that we see, things we've experienced. And so we actually took some patterns, not the same technology, but similar patterns to how Kubernetes works. And that's actually where we're pulling some of our ideas from, and conceptually how we're actually going to deploy the runner concept. Now, obviously, this is a very different type of application. It has nothing in common with it other than the pattern itself. And so that's actually what we're doing. And let me take that one layer deeper is, we built it on top of a distributed key value store. And that's actually how we're handling the handoff from controllers to runners and allowing the runners to scale horizontally.
I'm a lazy engineer as well. And that's one of the challenges that I've seen over and over is just I have something that I've written, but it's not very scalable. So how do I leverage another tool set? And it seems like Torero is on this path of solving that problem for me. So I could concentrate on just writing the script that solves my problem and leaving the distributed part to Torero in the upcoming feature, of course.
You're exactly right. And again, it goes kind of back to that idea. And we're trying to create kind of that definition around automation gateway and this idea that, right, there's all of this feature functionality that we all need, right, for doing network automation. It's one thing to do it in your own lab and your own development environment when I've got the router either virtualized on my own machine or I've got it sitting right next to me on my desk. But, when I really want to think about how do I do this in my real infrastructure when I'm hitting production nodes, and it's extremely important that I've got things like, logging, and I've got scalability, and I've got security. I'm a network engineer, man. That's not the stuff I'm writing. And I don't want to write that stuff. I want to automate my network. I don't want to be a full-time developer. I don't want to be a full-time sysadmin. I just want to automate my network, but I still have the requirement to do it in a safe and scalable way. And that's really the way I define automation gateway. And that's really what Torero is all about.
So you mentioned it works with Python, Ansible, and OpenTofu, and that I need some kind of Git-based repository for this to work. Is there anything else that I need before I can start using this, playing around with it?
That's it. You got your Git repository. You've downloaded it. It's a single binary executable. You download it. There's really not an install. It's just an executable. Put it in your path and go to town with it. By default, you'll play with it in local mode. And as you get more comfortable with it, then you can start your Torero server and you can start to have the team to come around it. That's all it takes to get started with it. One of the other areas that we tried to really make a very concerted effort to do is because we've all pulled down utilities like this and we've all started to use them. And then we go to the documentation and right, there's the eventual hello world documentation that doesn't work. And then we go into the help, and that only gives me half of the story. We put a lot of effort into not only the documentation site, but as well as the embedded help within the application. So the hope is that it is a very self-sufficient application that folks, can get a majority of their questions answered just simply by interfacing with the tool itself.
Yeah, I'm an advocate of good documentation.
Yep. I mean, I downloaded it and I have no problem. At least for me, I didn't have any problem running the hello world. But if I could ask for a pony, Peter, is more examples, please. I mean, right now, I think there's like a total of, I don't know, 50 lines of code of maybe on the Git repo. So yeah, I would love to see more, Ansible playbook examples. And clearly you guys have put some thoughts into the onboarding experience, and which was smooth for me because it was the weekend and even if there's support, I don't know who to call or if it didn't work. So thank you for doing that.
That was a big one and duly noted on the example. So you're going to see a hello, Eric example show up in Torero very, very soon. But yes, duly noted on the examples, because it's a really good point, right? We've, again, going back to, we've all experienced this, is that, you get into a tool and you get the hello world and everything works great. And then you want to do a real use case. And it's like, okay, I didn't really get enough information here. So that's great feedback and something that we will be sure to get added for sure.
So you mentioned one of the drivers for the Torero project is to help not just individual network engineers run automation, but for teams to be able to use existing automations. And you also mentioned wanting to be able to do it safely. So what kind of safety features would you say are in here? Do we get things like role-based access control? Is there logging to see who did what when kind of stuff? Or what do you mean by safety?
So safety comes in different layers. It starts with the most basic thing, and that is just simply having a robust logging capability so I can actually see what the heck's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the most often overlooked things when tools get developed, is making sure we're opening up that window. There are different ways of approaching how we do access control. The server certainly has access control capabilities, and we start the server and we can, create users and allow those users to have access to services. But then we also have the ability within Torero to, again, because everything's Git on the back end, we also have the ability to control exactly what parts of Git. We can attach it to any reference in Git. It doesn't have to just simply be a repo, a branch. It can be a tag. It can be a specific SHA. It can be a specific commit that only we give Torero access to. So it really allows organizations to get a lot of control over what kind of code Torero is pulling down and actually running in the infrastructure. And that in turn allows organizations to stay focused on building, secure layers at the repository as well, right? Which is, again, often overlooked or not. There's many times I've worked with organizations where, we've got a lot of the source code, but we can't actually get to it because of varying levels of security and whatnot. And we tried to build this in a way that really allowed organizations to decide how they want to make security work for them. One of the other aspects of Torero is we actually built in, and I'm going to be very cautious, and someone's going to probably throw something at me if the engineers could hear me say what I'm about to say, but we built in a very lightweight security management component to Torero. Now, let me be absolutely crystal clear. This is not in any way, shape, or form intended to compete with the HashiCorp vaults of the world or even the Ansible vaults of the world. But what it's designed to do is when you have just a basic need, a very simple secret that you need to be able to use, we have a way that you can actually do that in a very secure way within Torero. And then in subsequent releases, we'll actually expand on that capability where we will actually support plugins for secrets managers down the road.
Okay, so you anticipated my next question, which was how do you handle secrets management? But it sounds like you're working on that.
Yes. And again, the thought is here, right, is that, I think about times when I've gone to do development, against infrastructure. And, a lot of times we want to bang out a real quick use case or a real quick idea. And the challenge that we run into is all of a sudden I've got to build a whole bunch of infrastructure just so I can try out my very simple use case, unless I've already got it built out. I got to connect to my secrets manager. I got to connect to my inventory. I've got to connect to a repository. I got to connect to, whatever other systems I might need. And so as we continue to roll Torero forward, we will continue to add enough of those types of capabilities. They're not designed to scale into production, but they are designed to allow developers to very quickly iterate over, hey, I've got an idea. I want to quickly code it and try it out. Therefore, I don't need to build massive infrastructure to try it. Once I've proven it, now we can start to talk about how we move this into a fully supported production environment where Torero reaches out into all those type of back office systems.
I mean, just throughout conversation, I like the fact that how you intended not to take away the existing tools that people love and use so far all the time, Ansible, Namiko, Nornir. and try to incorporate that into Torero. Even when you're opinionated about something, you try to put a lightweight layer on top of it, but not force people to use it. So is that a designed concept that you try to do from the beginning?
It is. This was one of the key tenets when we sit down and put this together. I myself, I'm still a Vim user. I don't use all these new fancy IDEs. I'll admit, I mean, I write emails in Vim. I really do.
Oh my.
Yes, indeed.
I thought you said you were lazy.
Well, it's years and years and years of muscle memory is what it is. I couldn't tell you what the keystrokes are, but man, I can execute them with a flurry. But, don't get me wrong. There is some really great stuff out there. When you look at some of the plugins in VS Code and what has happened in a lot of the IDEs, there's great stuff out there. It doesn't map well to the way that I do things. And I wanted a tool that kind of followed that same philosophy that says, we're not going to try and solve everything. We want to integrate into what your world is and leave you in a very comfortable place. It's all about productivity. Sure, I can go out and learn new tools, but when I look back, I'm spending all my time learning tools when I really want to be learning network automation and better ways to do network automation. And so that's why we made that tenet up front, that Torero was designed to very frictionlessly and seamlessly be able to integrate into any environment, and organizations and individuals could start making use of it and get value from it.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that, because when Apple took away the escape key many years ago, I was not a happy camper either. And the first thing I opened it up was, how do I get that key back? And, they corrected, but not to deduct a few bonus points from my book. Peter, thank you for being here. Before we say goodbye, is there anything that we missed that you want to mention that we did not cover in our previous conversation?
I think we've hit the majority of, what Torero is. I do want to point out, so to get more information, it's torero.dev, torero.dev is where you can go to download the application. All the documentation is there. Get started using it. We've got a sign up there for if you want to be informed. I promise it's not going to be flooded with marketing. It's really there for us to communicate with the team. We have a Slack channel on the Network Automation Forum Slack instance. So come visit us there if you have questions, if you have comments. As I always tell people, I love to hear the good stuff, but I really want to hear where we can do better, because that's how we all get better. Yeah, I think that really covers it up, and be on the lookout on the horizon for, as I've said, all along through this, Torero is not an iTentral product, and that is true, and it will continue to not be iTentral product, but we do have some designs for the Torero technology and how it will incorporate into the iTentral product portfolio going forward.
I really like that. I think we're missing the in-between. That's the way I saw from the script to, like you said, you almost have to move mountains to get from 0 to 1 on some other tools. So this is where I see the void. And obviously you run the polls for the community and push out this tool. So thank you for doing that.
I love to take the credit. I mean, all the credit goes to the engineers, but I'll be more than happy to accept the credit on their behalf.
Drop Peter a note and drop the engineering team a note on the Slack channel on torero.dev and all the other links in the show notes that we'll provide with the show. So thanks again for being here, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation, and be on the lookout for the Hello Eric coming to torero.dev soon.
I'll hold you to it, actually. Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Remember to visit torero.dev. That's torero.dev to learn more about the project, try it out, and let us know your thoughts. Check out the show notes for links to Peter's presentation, demo videos, and much more. Do you have any feedback for Network Automation or this episode? Send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/FU. We want to hear from you. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.